This Andrew Tate thing, this Andrew Tate guy has been in a lot of the headlines. Do you know who he is? Probably a good thing you don't. He's been in, it's this guy that kind of came out with this kind of pseudo weird, kind of strange masculine approach. His base thesis, I guess, is saying that young men and men generally are missing something in their lives that the modern world hasn't given them. Jordan Peterson has alluded to similar things. Jordan Peterson's been on this podcast a few times. It's got me thinking about gender differences and our needs in the world. There's a lot of people in like YouTube and the self-help space that are saying men have these unmet needs because the world is becoming more equal and they are lacking their sense of purpose, and men are meant to be, I don't know, tribe leaders and all these kinds of things. And when you look at the suicide rates in our country, the single biggest killer of men under the age of 40 is themselves. It's suicide. And so I've been mulling this. Is there gender differences in your view? These are all very difficult topics, I understand, are men in particular having certain needs go unmet because of a changing world, in your view?
Everybody has unmet needs because of a changing world. Fact. Are there gender differences? Of course there are gender differences. And how we respond to men versus how we respond to women is different. A friend of mine who was, three things happened to her simultaneously. She's in the military. Three things happened to her simultaneously. Any one of them would be difficult, but all three of them happened to her at the same time. She was promoted to senior management. She became lieutenant colonel. She was deployed for 13 months, 12 months, and she was given her very first command. Okay, so any one of those things is a trial, and all three happened at once, right? And she took over a job where the previous 5 leaders had all been fired. It was a poorly run group. She would be working with people from different forces. So she's in the Air Force. She'd have Air Force and Army reporting to her, some of whom were much older than her and much more experienced than her. And she is a hard-driving, passionate young officer who said, I'm going to turn this group around and I'm going to prove to everybody that I can turn it around. I've been practicing leadership. I've been studying leadership. I want to be a great leader. And it was a failure. They were ignoring her. They weren't taking her seriously. And no matter how she powered up, it didn't work. And every night she would cry herself to sleep and started regretting being in the military. All she wanted to do was go home. She didn't want to be stuck on deployment anymore. What was something really exciting now became a regret. And she didn't know what to do. She was failing, which was hard for her to deal with alone. I mean, as it was. And so she decided to give up. And she said, I will not turn this group around. So if I'm going to fail at my job, then and I'm stuck here for another 6 months, and so is everybody else, I'm going to change my mandate. Then instead of turning this group around, I'm just going to ensure that the rest of their time here, they really enjoy it. I'm just going to make it more fun for them to come to work every day because they're also away from their families and stuck. And then something strange really started to happen. They started to listen to her, take her seriously. They started to respect her more. And she ended up being very, very high performing at the end, and the group completely turned around. Because on her way in, she made it about herself, and she made it about the metrics, and she made it about the performance. The lesson she learned was, if you make it about the people, then the people will take care of everything else. And I remember I sat down with her a week or two after she got back, and she's telling me this whole story for the first time, after she got back. And she started crying. And when she said to me, she goes, I have never felt a joy so deep as seeing someone discover that they are capable of more than they thought they were. Which is very different than, I'm going to turn this around. So in her telling me this, she said one of the big lessons she learned is there is such thing as female leadership. And she had a conversation with one of the soldiers. And why didn't you listen to me? Why was it so difficult? Why did we struggle? And he said point blank, because when a male officer yells at me, right, I take it, I hear it, I move on, right? It's fine. When you yelled at me, I felt like my mother was yelling at me. And it was more difficult, So there are gender differences in how we respond to each other, because it is a mom-dad thing, right? We respond differently. And men are sometimes, not always, but men are sometimes better at just being told blank by another guy, just do this. And you go, okay, well, I'll just do it. But when you create gender, it creates all kinds of other interpretations and associations, like our mothers. So I think we cannot discount those. And, traditional male leadership qualities are things like decisiveness, aggression, those kinds of things. Traditional female qualities are things like patience, maternal instinct, empathy. And I think the mistake we've made across all leadership is we teach male leadership. We teach decisiveness and we teach aggression. And these are the things we teach. And we teach that to everybody. And the reality is what makes great leaders is they have a balance. And what we should be teaching is more of female leadership. And, all leaders should take on the qualities of patience and empathy. This is the irony. And so I think we do need to teach those skills. I mean, those goes back to what we were saying before. These are those human skills. Women get my work a lot quicker than men. When I was starting my career, women would just nod and be like, yeah, what do you, of course. And men would be like, what are your case studies? And what case studies you have to prove your model?
Logic and
men would fight with me on some of the details, and women just intuitively understood that the humanity of the work that I was preaching just made sense. And there's space for that. And so, I think female leadership and those qualities are just necessary everywhere. But yes, there are differences, and they cannot be discounted.
It's difficult to talk about them though, isn't it? It feels like a minefield. Even when I talk about gender differences, it feels like I'm going to step on a mine somewhere, because you're entirely correct. And my previous company was, our managing director was a woman, and I think the business was more successful because of those qualities you've suggested: empathy, care, patience.
Yeah.
She was much more honest about forecasts.
Yeah.
And how the business was going to perform versus a male leader. I mean, this is such a narrow example, so it's not necessarily truth, but a male managing director we had who was extremely exaggerating and very, very, very ambitious about forecasts that were never realized.
That makes sense. That's consistent. And I think, there's lots of data on this. Men, when they apply for a job and they say we need these 10 things, and if they have 6 out of the 10, they apply for the job. And women won't apply for the job unless they have 9 or 10 of the qualities. Men are a little, I've seen it happen in meetings where, there's a male entrepreneur and like the client is saying, we'd love to have this. And they kind of have it. And the guy goes, we can totally do that. And, and they'll sell it right there and then figure it out later.
Yeah.
And I've sat in meetings with a female entrepreneur who has almost that, like they're really close. And somebody's saying we would love this. I'm like, you have that. They're like, it's not. We haven't tested it yet. I'm like, you have it. Tell them you have it. They're like, well, it's not perfect yet. So yeah, I mean, some of it is cultural as well. I have a female entrepreneur friend who has a theory, and I have to stress this is her theory.
Deferring responsibility.
Exactly right. She believes men make better entrepreneurs than women.
She believes men make better entrepreneurs than women. Okay.
Yes.
Why?
And the logic is that as when we're young, traditional roles, for the most part, still exist. That if you want to go to the prom, generally, the boy asks the girl, right? I think it's softening, but traditional roles are still there, which means from a young age, boys learn to muster up courage, take a risk, and get rejected. And then they have to do it again. And then they have to do it again, right? And so you flash forward to adulthood, and men who learn that skill
of asking,
of taking a risk, facing rejection, being rejected, and then trying again, makes them resilient entrepreneurs. Where for again, assuming traditional roles are played, if a woman who hasn't learned the skill of risk rejection is more afraid of the risk as an adult. Now, we could argue that with online dating, swiping left and right, that everybody's losing the skill. We could argue. that nobody has to take a risk because you just swipe right. You don't know that they swiped left on you. They think maybe they just didn't see you. So you only get the, we connected, but nobody ever gets rejected. So are we building, that goes back to the original conversation of a young generation that's less capable of dealing with stress than older generations. Like there are